Good morning. My name is Marcia Stromgren. You have tuned in to Just the Facts, and my guest today is Michelle MacDonald. She's running for the Minnesota Supreme Court. Welcome, Michelle. Nice to have you here with us.
Nice to have you, and thank you so much for presenting me to your listeners and the education that this show provides.
Well, we hope that's what our television program does. It gives an alternative view that you can't seem to find on regular media. So I'd like to start out by having you introduce yourself and why is it you're running?
Well, like you said, Marcy, I'm Michelle MacDonald, and I'm running for the Minnesota Supreme Court. I am the only candidate on all of your ballots. That's the only race that's statewide. So I'm on everybody's ballot in the whole state of Minnesota. I'm running because I want to restore faith in the fairness of our justice system. I have been an attorney in the trenches representing thousands of Minnesotans all over the state at every level, all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. Aside from that, I have also been a small claims court judge for 22 of those years. It was at an adjunct position. And I run a nonprofit, Family Innocence, dedicated to keeping families out of court. Primarily, what I've seen is over the last 29 years is we have now a system not of justice, Marcy, but of injustice.
I'm sorry to say I agree with you on that. I've seen that happen.
Okay.
So with that background in mind, why do you want to be in the Supreme Court? What is the reason for your striving for that role?
Well, it's has been an aspiration of mine for years. One of my aspirations since I was a young child was to be a justice on the United States Supreme Court.
Oh.
Yes, so this is one step towards that, or 29 years towards that. My whole legal career has gravitated towards that.
So I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes in the way cases are handled. Can you, without detailing certain ones, can you kind of summarize what you've seen happen with the court systems over the time that you've been an attorney?
What I've seen is that the courts are too much into our lives. The courts are the third branch of the government, and I'm for less government and more independence from the government. That's what I've seen. I've also seen, and this is critical, a conflating of our criminal system with our civil system. So some of our individuals that are in the civil realm are being treated like criminals. I've also seen not a deterioration, but the presumption of innocence is really gone. We don't have the presumption of innocence anymore. And that's some of the due process problems that we have. Can I explain?
Surely.
Thank you. Due process has become just a process. Okay, we gave you a court date. That's not due process. Want me to explain to you the elements?
Yes.
There are 6 elements of due process that are gone in the state of Minnesota and probably around the country. The first element is clear laws. Okay, we don't have clear laws. We used to when I first started, but I don't know whether it's because we can cut and paste so easily now, but our laws are very vague and generalized. The second element of due process is government adherence to those laws. In other words, if the name of the game is break a rule, you pay, how can the government, and I'm including law enforcement, I'm including judges, how can they break a rule, many rules, to make our citizens pay? That's the second step to due process. So you can see due process as a step. The third step to due process is a speedy trial. That doesn't happen. These cases, even in the civil realm, family cases drag on for months and years. You are caught in a machine if you're ever prosecuted, even for something as simple as a traffic violation. Our traffic violations, most of them are crimes. So we need speedy trials. Then the important thing with speedy trials, of course, is we need to have and it's not necessarily a judge, but we need to have an impartial decision maker. That could be an arbitrator or whatnot, somebody that's impartial. And then I'm not doing them in order. They're really not in order. All of these elements have to be present for there to be due process. Also, adequate representation. Now, that doesn't mean legal representation. It's adequate representation. That's another element of due process. And then lastly, and this is where I come in, because I think we've lost the last element of due process, it's very perfunctory, is an appellate process. We have an appellate process, but it's there, and there's not access to it. What I mean by that is, and I don't mean to go on and on. If you want to jump in with a question, you can, but it's more perfunctory in the fact that most orders are immediately enforceable, which used to not be the case in family law. You'd have 30 days to kind of process it, decide, then it would be entered as a judgment, and you'd have some time to appeal. That doesn't happen in the juvenile cases where they take children away from families, and it doesn't happen in family court. These orders are immediately enforceable, so there was no appellate process there. And then, of course, at the end of the case, after you've spent time and money and energy going through the process, you're out of money. And it's a very costly process. You do need an attorney to help you, and attorneys don't do, except for me probably, don't do pro bono appeals. I've done over 60 appeals, appealing constitutionality of our laws and for many of my clients.
It sounds to me that our judicial system is a bit more convoluted than it ever used to be. It seems to me it was simpler back in time, and now, because there's a lot of maybe hungry lawyers, if I may even say that, that feel that they need to have a chunk of this action, they've shortchanged the person who's supposed to be being defended by laws of the state. Is that a rather broad type of statement, would you say?
Marcy, you're a genius. We have become a government for the lawyers, by the lawyers, and of the lawyers. I have been a lawyer since 1987. And that's how it's evolved. It was that way back then, but now they have taken over. I'm always almost insulted when somebody says to me, I'll call them lay people, my constituents say, I'm not a lawyer, but I say, please don't be a lawyer. Don't think like a lawyer. Try to be more natural about things. Our government has become a bureaucracy of sorts. You need a lawyer to fill out a form these days. Try looking at the form for applying for assistance and see if you can expect an 18-year-old pregnant woman to be able to fill out that form without assistance. So that's part of the obstruction of us getting fairness and liberties.
Interesting. And how long ago has this been derailed? This system of justice? How long ago did that start becoming?
Goodness. Well, I was legally trained in a law school, so we studied the Constitution. In some states, you study the Constitution in high school. I didn't go to a high school that had that study. But I just want to tell you what I see is we are going to court to get our rights, and that's wrong. the Constitution doesn't give us our rights. Laws don't give us our rights. They're supposed to be intended to enforce rights that we already have that are fundamental, like the air we breathe. So it's kind of flip-flopped or backwards, where we see the Constitution as giving us rights, and it's not. It's reinforcing rights we have by being born on this planet.
That's very interesting you should say that, because I look back to a situation where my husband and I were in. He was in business as a contractor. And we had to hire an attorney against a crook who already had a history of being a crook to other people. And he won, because I don't believe that the attorney we had did justice for us. I really don't. So I had a first-hand experience in the courtroom of misjustice. And I wanted to appeal it, and the odds of that happening were so small of winning that we just backed off, and we ended up having to pay this criminal. And he had been paid before and before and before. I found the records of how he had manipulated the court system to get what he wanted on these other people. And I think I see that happening more often than not today. And so what has gone wrong with the justice system? It used to be simple and uncomplicated, but it's no longer that way. Would you want to explain to me how this has all gone wrong?
Here's the problem, Marcia. Here's what I see as the fundamental problem. We should be going to courts get when our liberty rights to our children, for instance, and our property are being taken away, and we want some accountability. Instead, it's the opposite. We go to courts, and our liberty rights are taken away to our property and our children to one degree or another in every court situation. It has become complicated. I often think that the court administrators whom we hire, I mean, we're paying our taxes, right? I often think that their hands are tied. They can't give, they call it legal advice. Well, you can give legal information. You're supposed to be somebody there at the counter that's assisting and helping people maneuver through. Also the judges, I think their hands are tied with a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of policies and a lot of laws. And I know, as your Minnesota Supreme Court Justice, I can change that.
So it has to start up at that level before we can get any real justice lower down.
Absolutely. We need reform from the top down. Let me tell you about the Minnesota Supreme Court, and let me tell you how perfunctory that is, okay? They take 1 in 800 cases a year, okay? That means that there are 8,000 cases filed with the Minnesota Supreme Court a year, okay? If there are 8,000 filed, imagine all of the thousands and thousands and thousands of disgruntled Minnesotans that never got there. And imagine once you get to the Supreme Court and you have a serious issue, they're only taking 1 out of 800. Then let's get to how the judges operate. There are 7 of them. Okay, how are 7 judges going to handle 800 Supreme Court cases a year? It's not possible. And why is that? It's the appellate court is not doing its job. They're not holding the lower court judges accountable. Because if they were, there wouldn't be this many cases.
To get up to the higher level.
Exactly, exactly. And how can, when I am Minnesota Supreme Court Justice, things have to change. They're very, they do a lot of policies. I will be able to contribute to policies to making things simpler. This does not have to be a difficult system. We do not have to have all these obstructions to get to the level of appeal.
That's very interesting. What are some of the ways that you feel that you could be successful in doing that, if you've already got the same mentality basically on the court system already, how do you feel that you can make some kind of a change or difference in that area?
I'm going to say they have to stop pretending. They have to stop pretending they're doing their job. I don't know who's cutting and pasting. I don't know who's actually making these decisions. And I don't understand why some of the decisions are unpublished. If, why are they so wishy-washy? So there has to be some accountability with the appellate court. That's one thing I could do.
Well, one person on the Supreme Court, there's 7, right? Is that correct?
Right.
One person fighting 6 others. Does it look like there is any mix on there right now that leans to thinking in the fashion that you are talking about right now, that there would be some short-term successes, or are we going to be waiting a long time to convince others what you're saying are the changes that need to be made?
I think they're going to welcome me. I think what's happening is that we have an archaic system, where, and I think they're going to welcome me. What I really think that it's going to come to is we're going to create a more unitive system. And it won't be the punitive system or the hierarchy that it is right now. And I believe that because the justices have just been kind of in the grind, and the judges down below and the lawyers down below kind of in the, just caught up in kind of the maze, maybe even the web of different laws and what they do. And it's just static in the courtroom, I call it. That's what I want to create, and I think it will be welcomed by, of course, the state of Minnesota, all the Minnesotans, and I think it will be welcomed. I think I believe that they are going to realize they don't have to pretend anymore. They can be accountable. They can kind of maybe even confess that they can't handle 800 cases a year with 7 judges, and we need to change our system to make it more unified. Doesn't have to be adversarial.
How would you say is a good change if we've had this system for how many years? What do you see as a way that is a possibility of changing that? Because obviously we know that there are attorneys out there, their goal is to get you into court, and they don't. Some of them, and the one we experienced with the situation in my husband's business, I don't think he really cared. I didn't feel a sense of closeness with him. As a matter of fact, I got a little bit adversarial with him simply because he kept making a statement that finally I just told him right out. I said, "You're here to defend us, not argue with us as to the merits of this case." So he was the only attorney that we ended up being able to find under the circumstances of this situation. So I felt it was a very poor experience all around, and I don't feel that he put his effort into defending us. He told my husband more than once he was too honest. Oh, so we're supposed to go in there and lie. I guess that's what he was trying to tell us. Well, yeah, that kind of made me angry with the way he was handling it.
Well, I think eliminating the adversary process. I've been on a side of a case where we're really not arguing about anything, but we still, because the process kind of inherently is adversarial, so that would be one way of doing it. And especially, wouldn't it have been really something? And I'm trained in restorative justice circles, but wouldn't it have been really something if you, your husband, and the judge, along maybe without lawyers, just got to sit down with the other side and talked about it as long as you wanted until you were actually heard and felt that the judge heard you. Most people going to court, they just want to be heard. and the judges have to spend the time. And certainly there are good judges. I've been before hundreds of judges. I've helped thousands of people maneuver through the legal challenges, and certainly are good judges. And the best ones are the ones that take their time and they're heard. And it's really not that hard. I feel bad because judges are also caught up in the bureaucracy and the legal system too, and they have to finish a case in a year and all this stuff. It's not right. These court processes need to be more consent processes and not as coercive, not as scary, and communication processes. That's how I would create a reunified system to actually put forth more restorative kind of justice circles where people can communicate in a safe place and actually resolve their conflict. And believe it or not, it happens. I've seen, people would think it was miracles that happen, and I've just seen so many people kind of connect heart to heart, connect to each other's humanity, forgive and forget, those kinds of things. That's the unitive system we can create if our justice system cooperates, and that's what I intend to help it do.
Well, when you have your attorney say to you that you're too honest, he told my husband he was too honest. So, okay, I guess we were taught that we don't go in there and lie. That's not a part of the system that is supposed to be being presented here. But we spelled it out exactly the way it had happened from our viewpoint. The other guy lied through the whole situation, and he had more than one situation he was in, and he'd won all along by lying rather than telling the truth. And then to have to sit there and tell your attorney who is supposed to represent you that we're giving you the facts as they have happened to us, why would we want to lie about this to win the case?
That's
what kind of a system is this that you have attorneys advising you not to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth? And yet the other side can come in and lie through their teeth and win the case against you.
Yeah, that's another thing that's archaic, is that we raise your right hand, and I'm going to have you raise your right hand. Do you swear to report the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay. I forgot to give you the reporter's oath that I give to reporters that contact me.
Oh.
But that is archaic. We should always be telling the truth. Okay. I've had mediators get up on the stand and say, well, I wasn't under oath, when they lied in some kind of a document. I wasn't under oath. I've had people say, well, that was just a typo. Things like that. So that's another static in the courtroom kind of thing. We shouldn't have to raise our right hand to tell the truth. We should always be telling the truth. And you know what? I've learned there is a truth. I used to think there was one side of the case, another side of the case, and then the truth was somewhere in the middle. There are true facts. And I'm a small claims court judge, and I that's how I realized it. I thought, there are true facts. The truth is not somewhere in the middle. The facts can be discerned. And that's another thing that our courts, our lower courts, have completely missed. They don't try to discern facts anymore. Look at an order out there. I look at them all the time now, and this used to be very objectionable. They would say something like, Marcia testified to the fact that Michelle was wearing a red suit. Okay. They say what the people testified to. They don't actually, in their orders, say she was wearing a red suit. That is their job, not to say, well, Marcia said she was wearing a red suit and Jim, the producer, said she was wearing a pink suit. What is the fact? It's not what Jim said. It's not what Marcia said. That's the court's job, to discern the facts, not to just parrot back what people are saying on the stand. So that might have been very helpful for you if you could trust your judge to actually do his job, and that is the job of a judge. The job of a judge is to discern facts Apply facts to relevant law, and discern relevant facts, by the way. Apply facts to relevant law, make a legal conclusion, and do an order.
Well, no, something that came up in that situation, Michelle, was the fact that this guy had had a history of doing what he did to us. But none of that was relevant in the case. You couldn't look back on his history and say, there's a pattern here.
Remember what I said?
That does not make any sense to me. If there's a person who is committing crimes against other people, and you can't look back on the history of that person and what happened, it's his word against our word. And so he lied through his teeth. We told the truth, but the judgment went against us.
Remember what I said about conflating the criminal and the civil? You just hit the nail on the head. You wanted information, and it probably should have been perfectly acceptable. The other side was trying to get at not the true facts. And I think that we just want to be able to trust our judges. I mean, that's what has been lost. Remember I said restore faith in the fairness of our justice system. Even as an attorney, I cannot sit here in a room with a client and say, yes, the judge is going to see this, or the judge is going. I can't trust judges because, of course, there's an adversary process, and if we could trust our judges to just be diligent and take the time to discern the truth, oh my gosh, we would have justice. And it would start early on in due process.
And I don't think your courts would be so full of, liars, people who are trying to get what they can out of the other person. Take all of the facts, look at this, how it weighs against what's going on. I mean, my husband doesn't even have a traffic violation that I recall. So, I mean, he doesn't have any history of any kind of a record. His business has always been on the up and up. And yet this guy who he had a very bad history, got away with injustice against us. Now, where is the justice in the system? I know that more than one person experiences that type of thing all the time. And yet, you have to have a big pool of money to draw from, and you have to have a very intelligent lawyer to make sure you get justice anymore in the system.
Well, hundreds of thousands. You know, when I talked about due process, remember I said clear rules, clear laws. We don't have clear laws.
No.
Okay? Take a look at, for instance, our law on disorderly conduct. That could apply to, maybe the way Jim treated me when I came here. Only kidding, Jim. I mean, in other words, we can just exaggerate facts to say same with sex crimes. The true sex crimes have been diluted, so to speak. Somebody kind of pointed out to me that we jail more citizens than any other country. I'm sorry, I think this fell off. We jail more citizens than any other country. Let me put this back on.
It has to slip into the little, there.
Okay.
There's a little groove to put it into.
I certainly want to be heard, Marcy.
There we go.
Okay, thank you. So America, when I heard that, and I heard it in the last campaign, and you might know that I ran for Minnesota Supreme Court Justice in 2014. I was Republican endorsed by the Republican Party that year, and also I received 47% of the votes of the people of Minnesota. And that was really just by word of mouth. I had been practicing and helping people for all those years, so I appreciated that. But we get back to my point, I got a little distracted with my microphone, is the clear laws. They're not clear. They should be as clear as a stoplight. Green means go, red means stop, and yellow means slow down. I was going to use the example of disorderly conduct. I could tell you a story about one of my husband's Former employees just recently contacted me. I was in court with him. We got it resolved the first day. Call that a speedy trial, but it wasn't disorderly conduct. And that's where the discretion of our law enforcement comes in. Again, they can't break rules to make people pay. Sometimes you just have to let things go. Yeah, you just can't try to capture everybody. It's just not. It's just so corrupt. I mean, obviously there are good police officers out there. My father-in-law, my former father-in-law, was a police officer for 40 years in the city of Boston, where I'm originally from. So I'm just telling you, I know, the difficulties they go through. But I think we're operating on fear, and that's a big problem. We're operating on wanting to control things, control the future. That's a big problem. And our officers and our citizens can't continue to operate on fear. That's not right.
And I think a lot of that comes from the corruption that is going on behind the scenes, people that are, not aware of a lot of the things that are taking place. But a lot of that stems from more laws and regulations that really take away basic freedoms. And I have to say, having monitored the 709 school district for many years, we aren't teaching the basic rights of people any longer. And so we're operating under a system of fear. We have good police officers, we have good court judges, but we also have the element of bad. And it seems like the worst are outweighing the good, and so we have this convolution of problems there's no easy fix. And so we have to start someplace by getting some good, solid, basic people elected into office so that we can make some changes, and they will be gradual. They're not going to change overnight because we didn't get to the mess we're in. We don't have a lot of people in society that have self-control.
I beg to differ. It's got to change overnight. It has to be very, very soon. I've heard people say that, and no. I've been working on this for years. Lots of people have been working on similar issues for years. It's got to change. We can't go on like this anymore. Good judge, bad judge, good citizens, bad citizens. We have to get government out of our lives and stop operating on fear. Let me give you an example of our family laws. Okay, you're married to your husband, right? Okay, and if you decide to divorce, there's a book about 1,000 pages that will apply to you just because you've decided to separate. Now, it used to be you'd have to actually file a divorce, and divorce is a lawsuit, by the way. Don't let anybody fool you. It might be a friendly lawsuit, but it's the only realm where every single agreement that you have in that document, and it could be 20, 30, 40 in some cases, if you count subparagraphs, 120 agreements, those are all court orders subject to contempt. So just because you're getting a divorce doesn't mean that you have to be subject to court orders, but it does in our culture, unfortunately. I learned, and this was before I became a lawyer, that when you wanted a divorce before, you just go to the legislature, and just like you got your marriage certificate, you would get a divorce certificate, and you would be done with it. So this is how it's evolved into, again, an adversary system. That's just one example of the family laws, also the criminal laws as well. They're hard to follow. We as citizens, if they're vague and generalized, how do we know? And also sometimes, and it's actually unconstitutional to have strict liability laws. Like you need to go 55 in a 55-mile speed limit, and if you go 51 or 49, I can stop you for speeding or going too slow. That's what our police officers are doing. They're not letting things go, using their discretion properly.
Interesting. Well, okay, I don't disagree with you on what you just said. However, without teaching properly in the school system. I think that's where we have to go back to. We have to start giving people a framework of the basic laws and whatnot that they have to stay within, where I know my civics class, and I've been out of school a few years now, it was reading a book that you took a test on, and it really made no sense to the most of us. So would you say that perhaps we have a problem with our public education system that is really not educating the people properly, because everybody has their rights today? Well, what are those rights? What framework of rights are you actually entitled to over your neighbor?
If we're going to talk about the educational system, do you have a couple of hours? I was very fortunate to have gone to a school that where I had my liberties to learn. You know, we'd go on when I was little. I don't think I think children have to learn on their own for a time, and all of us want our children to know their ABCs, you know, before they're 2 and those kinds of things. But and know how to, now little children are using technology, so they're not really learning to maneuver through life in a natural way. They're inherently smart. They inherently know right from wrong. And so, yeah, if you got a couple of hours, I can talk to you about Common Core that I learned about the last campaign, and our educational system, our public educational system, just needs some help, for sure.
I think a major overhaul would be a better way of saying it, because I'm very well aware of Common Core myself. And so, yeah, I've seen the educational system change since when I graduated in 1965. But we have to teach, I think many children are coming from homes where they have not been taught the basics of right and wrong. And so they use the court system to get everything that they want, whether it's right or not, and someone else is at fault and is going to pay because this person is stepping all over our rights to attain their own. Now, basic common sense seems to be missing in the picture here, and I should imagine you see that all the time in the court system.
Yes, the common sense is out the window. There's not a lot of common sense in our, even in our criminal justice system, even through law enforcement.
So you're having lawyers who get a client they're going to get paid for one way or another, basically don't know their rights, and the attorney can manipulate the rights to fit the case so that he gets paid, and whether this person wins right or wrong against another person right or wrong is more or less what you just keep seeing continually going forward.
That's, that brings to mind when I was a young lawyer, before I, just a puppy lawyer, I'll say. I remember an attorney telling me that I worked with that lawsuits are peaks and valleys. So you really just want to hit the peaks. You don't want to hit the valleys. So that's what you were probably experiencing right there. A material omission of facts, see, that you can't get through, that would kind of come to light. Fraud. Fraud's very hard to prove, and it shouldn't be. Material omissions that are substantial, it's fraud. You materially omitted a fact that's relevant. So I think that's what you were experiencing there, and that's why the circle is so important, because it's a place where everybody can be heard, and not just heard in the sense that, I've spoke right now, but I would ask you, what did you hear me say? And you'd say what you thought you heard me say, and I'd say, is that it? And you might say, I might say, no, you didn't hear me. See, we're using words, but sometimes our words don't convey exactly what we want want to say. I've seen that in court a lot. You know, you read a transcript and the judge went a totally different way because the judge wasn't thinking about the words. The judge was connecting to the integrity of the person. So yeah, that's part of the unitive system that I intend to create when I'm on the Supreme Court. It's by education. When I didn't even get educated about restorative justice circles till just a few years ago. And you know what I said? I just want to do circles. I said this is kind of the way to go. And I didn't even want to practice law anymore. I wanted to do these circles, and it's so hard to get people to come to the circle because in our culture we're very, very afraid of conflict, and we're kind of trained, I guess, to not have contact. Courts do no contact orders. Even if you want to contact someone to say I'm sorry, it's kind of regular. So we're prohibited from contact, moving towards that communication. And really, it shouldn't be as scary, and it isn't as scary as you might think.
Can a judge force that type of situation, Michelle, if it's necessary?
No, you can't get a summons to a circle, and that's the beauty of it and also the detriment of it. So it's a consent process. So when, you can come to the circle or you can leave the circle in the middle of the circle, it's a consent process. So yeah, you can't be subpoenaed to a circle. You can't, it used to be you couldn't even be ordered to do mediation, but now they regularly order it. But when mediation's ordered as part of an adversary process, and it's very expensive, almost as expensive as attorneys, except you split the process, it isn't, and you have to do it within a month or something like that. That's too coercive, and many people are coerced into mediating because it costs money. They have to pay their lawyer to be there, and most of the time they have to pay the mediator, and they're there, and they have to do it in an hour, and it really isn't. It shouldn't be designed for that. In the circle, and if we could, in the unitive process, it's a consent process. Now, what if somebody doesn't? We've experienced cases where somebody doesn't want to come to the circle. There is an avenue for that, and it's called substitution. So then we can have the person that comes to the circle actually hear through a substitute what they're saying or how they're being heard. I may be talking right now, and some people are hearing just different things, or wrenching out or pulling out, like when you go to a seminar, you get these little nuggets. Maybe, hopefully, people are getting little nuggets from me out there. But there's a difference between the words and actually connecting and hearing.
Well, I certainly did understand that when we were going through this situation. It was against my husband's business. But it was a very painful, expensive learning experience, because the history of the fellow that sued us was never allowed to be a part of the process, which you would have thought that we had a clean record, someone who had been into court on numerous occasions would have been looked at a little bit more closely, and somehow or other something would have been worked out. But it got to the point where we had to come up with the settlement, and there was no way of, unless we wanted to pay more money to attorneys, to go back and revisit this whole situation, which I felt was an injustice on the part of our court systems. So if you were elected to the Supreme Court, how can you convince the 6 other judges that sit with you that the process that you're dealing with right now is broken and needs to be fixed?
I think they know it. I think the jig's up. I really think they know it, and Did I ever explain to you, and I don't think I did, what a corruption is? Okay. I had a
No.
corruption in my computer system at work. Okay, we have a network system. And all of a sudden, we're at work. We didn't know this corruption was even there, and it just broke down. We just couldn't do anything with our computers, save anything, it broke down. So our computer guy, fortunately we had a backup, had to go back to when the corruption started. And we learned that it had been 2-3 months prior that corruption happened, but our system was still moving along. So that's the definition of corruption. I don't think it's intentional. It's just that our system cannot go on this way. I've seen it grown to a system of injustice. It's not a system of justice. The people that I talk to on a daily basis, thousands, perhaps millions in Minnesota, are dissatisfied. And an appeal is not going to, it's perfunctory, even if you can afford to get there. Especially if you get to an appeal before me as Minnesota Supreme Court Justice, and I can only take 1 out of 800 cases. That's like absurd. It shouldn't be that way. It is a sign that people are disgruntled with our justice system down below. And it starts with no due process. The due process is gone. Presumption of innocence is gone. Those kinds of things.
So can you tell us some of the ways that you would implement change?
I think by education, first of all. I think this, Marcy, thank you for having me here, because I think by education. I'm just going to have to get in there and go to town. It's probably going to be, I probably won't rest until I see that there are some, it's really not even a change. It is a transformation. Our justice system is archaic. We just have to recognize it. We just have to see it. It's breaking down. The system is just a system. It's not a system of justice. Whatever I can do for the state of Minnesota when I get elected, that is I'll do in an organic fashion, but primarily through education, and then it needs to be transformed.
Well, having worked monitoring our school system for the last 8 years, I just decided that I've had enough of that. So I'm moving on to other things. If it's not being taught in the public educational system, which I can guarantee it isn't, perhaps that's part of the system that's going to have to be forced to change, because how can we convey to the masses of people there has to be change? And what are some of the ways? Do you have some suggestions on how we could make this change to get the people better educated as to what their rights are, and so that we don't keep plugging up the system with more and more cases that are really going nowhere?
Right. Just fundamentally, just knowing that your liberty rights are yours just by virtue of being born. They're fundamental, they're inherent, and that the courts are there to protect your liberty rights, not to take them away. If fundamentally we don't run to court for every little thing that happens, and we actually try to resolve our own conflicts, like we did growing up with brothers and sisters stealing our clothes. I remember my sister did that. I did it a few times to her too. I come from a very large family, 8 brothers and sisters, and it was. So these things happen in our family realm. We have a Fourth Amendment right that protects us in our own homes, and I think that the government's getting involved, and I think we're also inviting the government in a lot. For instance, if your child has, it wasn't my own personal situation, but I had a woman who found drugs, a smaller amount in her home that would belong to her teenage child, and actually went to authorities, and she was shocked to know that once the authorities came in, they were going to put him through a system. She thought they would help him. She would get help dealing with him, making sure he's okay, but that's not the case. Even in the juvenile system, It's a punishment system and a punitive system and not a restorative system.
That certainly needs to change because children make mistakes.
Right, right.
They are not adult thinking, and so, they like to experiment. They like to try things that are unsafe. So a child like that ends up in the system as a criminal.
Well, yeah, I learned, and this was, 30-something years ago when I was in law school, that there's 3 reasons somebody would go to jail. One is for punishment. So that would be one reason. Another is because they need to be locked up. They're going to go out and re-offend. They're somewhat evil. And then the third reason is for rehabilitation. So we need to err on the side of liberties. And we need to err on the side of letting people go free and, giving them a second chance or a third chance or a fourth chance, because that is, it's just really important. We can't capture everyone. It used to be, it used to be if we capture one innocent person and have to let that innocent person go free along with 10 guilty people, we've done our job. We don't want, and now it's like, well, there might be a few innocent people in there, but we've captured them all, so let's keep them captured and keep them good. Once you're in the system, and ask anybody for any reason who's been in the system, whether it's juvenile court, whether it's criminal court, whether it's civil court, whether it's family court, it's like a machine. You can't get out of it. They won't let you go because they're a branch of the government. And, that's just that. It's just another problem with government, the third branch of government, judges, being involved in our lives.
It's not like it used to be where that statue was holding a scale that weighed evidence against innocence. It's no longer that way then. It's more tilted the other way, which is really sad for especially our younger generation who get caught up in it. We all make mistakes. I can't tell you how many I made as a child. And my parents were not very lenient when it came to meting out the punishment. I can say that. But it gave me a healthy fear not to be foolish and stupid like that once again. But if you take a child who has done drugs one time and throw them in a system of criminals, you're making a bigger criminal than you started out with, rather than have something that's more lenient and understanding that this is a child that made a mistake. We don't want to throw them into a system that's going to make them a worse criminal.
Right, and let's remember, our babies, our children, how precious they are. Almost making me cry here, but that their first community when they come is their home, the home that they're in when they come home from the hospital. That's their first community. And they look up to their parents. They don't know God. Maybe inherently they do. They don't know what laws are. They just look up to their parents, and they love those parents so much. And they're very, very forgiving as well. We need to protect that. We need to protect that and not make parents afraid that they might have not changed a diaper earlier enough, or maybe they gave them 4 meals instead of 3 meals, or maybe they didn't have enough milk in the refrigerator, or maybe they have 3 kids and they're all sleeping in the same bedroom, which was my situation. I had my sisters and I all slept in the same bedroom, and there were 4 of us. So why are we regulating or judging? It really does, it's judgments that are getting in the way. And people think, well, no, it's a fact. It's a fact that there's only 1 bedroom for 3 little children. And I say, no, that is a judgment. It's a judgment about a fact. If the child is growing up in a safe environment with his parents, let the child have those parents, knucklehead or otherwise. They love their parents. It goes back to, we have something called the Indian Child Welfare Act that I've worked with for years. because I also am an adoption attorney. I represent people who are adopting and also adoption agencies. And back then, we used to take children away from Indians because they drank too much, or they lived in teepees, or they smoked whatever they smoked, and we'd just go in and take the children away because we'd place them for adoption with a nice family, white family, let's say. And now the Indian Child Welfare Act you can't do that anymore. And even if somebody who has a little bit of Indian blood wants to place for adoption, we have to, send all kinds of notices out to the tribes to say, anybody there want to adopt this child? And most of the time, it's a consensual adoption. Really, all of the time it's consensual, but we still send the notice. We are doing that with our families right now. We are, allowing the government to come in and take our children when we're making mistakes and place them in foster care or in another home. And it's not right. It's not right. Our social, do you have another couple of hours? Social work isn't available anymore. There isn't social work anymore. I've talked with social workers that 30 years ago said, we used to be able to help these people. We used to be able to drive them to their appointments because they didn't have a car. And now how it is that they can't. And if you miss a court date, you lose your kid. It's about court dates and processes. It isn't really about assisting you and helping you. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that doesn't get to the people. So we're paying taxes, people, to support a multi-billion-dollar industry that's completely top-heavy, and it's not getting to the people the money that need it.
That's kind of sad to hear that. I mean, I don't have any experience in that realm whatsoever, but that is really sad because there are a lot of kids that are being sucked up into the system that should never be in the system just because a parent made a mistake. I have had my time all wrong here. Well, I would like you to wrap up, Michelle, what you would do if you were elected to this position on the Supreme Court.
You mean when I'm elected?
All right.
I'm going to transform the justice system. I'm going to create a system of justice and not the injustice that is taking place right now. I am going to be accessible to the people. That's one thing I decided because I can be. I can have the good citizens of Minnesota call me or write me or talk to me. Their case isn't before me, so it isn't like I'm making prejudgments. Their case will probably never get before me because look at how hard it is for the good people of Minnesota to even get justice down in the trenches. So that's accessibility, accountability, and all of that is what I'm all about, and we got to stop pretending up at the higher levels of the courts.
Sounds to me like there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yes, but I think it's going to be welcomed. I mean, I believe with all my heart it's going to be welcomed because I just think that it's going to just break down then. And I think that we just cannot go at the pace we go. And we have to, serve our citizens with justice. It's not happening right now.
Well, I would have to agree, having been in that situation, like I said, a few years ago. So I appreciate your coming in today and giving us an idea what you would be acting like come November 8th. You are on the ballot, and be sure that you think wisely and make wise choices when you go to vote on November 8th. Thank you very much, Michelle, for coming in today.
Thank you so much, Marcia.
Nice to have you here.